probably the most overdue review I've yet to do. It's a speaker I have been hearing about literally for years and kept thinking this is not a speaker that's really going to suit me. And it has evolved from the Onyx Studio 1 into what we have now, the Onyx Studio 6, with Onyx Studio 7 apparently imminent. And I finally decided to bite the bullet. So much interest in it. It does fit in with what I'm doing now rather than just sitting on the beach. Sadly, I haven't done for a couple of years. So this is it, the Onyx Studio 6. Gonna put it up against my pound for pound world champion, Soundcore Motion Boom. It's become really interesting because people have been arguing on my channel, the Soundcore Motion Boom. It's got as much bass as the Onyx 6, and yet other people are saying, no, the Onyx 6 kicks the butt of the Motion Boom. I do know, for its size and its price, has astonishing deep bass. When I say astonishing deep bass, it has a sort of rolled off, but not quite rolled off, 40 hertz, playing down 40 hertz, almost the start of subwoofer territory. And a speaker like this, albeit we're disappointed it's got no tweeters, is impressive. So is it that people haven't heard the Motion Boom and that's why they're saying fantastic deep bass on this? Or those people that have both the Motion Boom and the Onyx Studio 6, they're either a little bit deaf or they're spot on when they say it's the same bass or it's deeper bass on the Onyx Studio 6. It's quite a long preamble, isn't it, into my intro, just giving you the story behind it, why I think it's interesting. Now, they are very different looking speakers, and in fact, the Onyx Studio is a speaker has evolved a lot since Onyx Studio 1. Now, it's always been a round thing, but it comes in many configurations. Now, the Onyx Studio 6, one woofer, one tweeter, one passive radiator. There was a time they had two tweeters, two passive radiators, two woofers, a nice stereo setup. We've now ended up on the 6, which is basically the Onyx Studio 5, but with an IPX7 that's dropping 1 meter of water for 30 minutes, waterproof covering. We now have a speaker that's, mono. It's one tweeter, one woofer, one passive radiator, but you can hook up two. So, I can see what they've done. They've said, we're going to have nice, clean stereo. We'll make the speaker itself mono, and then they can have a pair of them. We'll get a lot more money, and they'll get a lot better sound. But no, pair up two of them. It's dual audio. It's dual mono. Oh, wow. We've always wanted that. You'd never know they were connected in some way to JBL, would you? So, two of them do not play in stereo. Two of them are still mono. And that's a speaker that has a stereo heritage. Anyway, give you a taste of what to expect in terms of what the measurements say. Do the measurements say Onyx Studio 6 is a match for a Motion Boom? Does it kick the butt of the Motion Boom? What are the differences? I'm also going to show you why I nearly but not quite did a separate EQ that was bass heavy for the Motion Boom against my normal, it's evolving, my kind of normal custom EQ. Motion Boom. Custom settings, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. We're doing really nicely up to 80%. That's pretty flat. And at 60%, that's plus or minus 3, taking us down to like 55 hertz. That's why we have great deep bass in the Motion Boom. But 80%, it does start limiting the bass. You do get increases in bass all along, even at 100%, but relative to the rest of the frequency response, it's minimal. And you end up, as you can see, it's pretty mid, high-end, heavy. So I figured, okay, why don't we just, from 80% onwards, have a bass heavy EQ. So we set 80 hertz plus 8, 150 hertz plus 4, and I measured that against the custom settings I am using in this video. The responses look pretty much the same, except we seem to have a bit more of a dip. Around 120 hertz, we've got volume increases all the way along, and that's telling me, we've seen it with Soundcore before, this is that old trick. You go louder everywhere, people hear that as an increase in dynamics, and they think they've got something for nothing. If I overlay, you can see they're basically identical. You haven't got any more bass, so really not going to be worth messing around with bass heavy EQ. At 100%, that's not overlaid. That's measuring them both in their own right at 100% volume, as you can see, basically the same overall frequency response I showed you. The Onyx Studio 6 on battery power. Now you will notice 300 hertz and up. That's really, really flat. Oh, blimey, that's bass heavy. And we've got two distinct peaks in the bass, around 180 hertz and around 55 hertz. But we do have a little bit of a dip in between. And look at the slant rising all the way from about 500 hertz. But by the time you go over 80%, it's limiting bass. You're getting a little bit more by the time of 100%, very much like the Motion Boom's response. You get a little bit more bass, but really you're getting more mids and highs. And the overall sound signature is changing considerably. You can plug in the mains lead, but the frequency response remains the same. You don't get more bass-heavy sound, but what you do get is louder. So exactly the same responses as on battery power, except it does go louder. So I'm going with +1 at 150 hertz. This is a matter of debate, will always be a matter of ongoing debate. For me, that 150 hertz slider, you can have more punch, or you can have more clarity in your vocals. The more I push my 150 hertz slider up, the more muddied the vocals become. But yes, slightly more boomy, but yes, you get loads more punch. So there are a lot of you, I'm aware, maxing out your 150 hertz. And I did start at -2 at on my 150 hertz slider, normally around 0. But I think let's try and find an area that's going to please as many people as possible. Let's put it at +1. I think that covers most bases. Ha ha, pun. And as you can see, once you get into high volumes anyway, which is the territory at which they start reducing the bass, and you want a bass heavy EQ, it starts doing weird things. And actually, in actual fact, by the time you hit maximum volume, no difference at all. Limiters are cutting in. There's no free lunches. Now, does look like we've got a very bass heavy speaker. Unfortunately, it's not completely matched to, so 300 hertz up, that looks lovely and flat, lovely and smooth, but clearly this is tuned for bass. So the bass looks a little bit out of step with the rest of the frequency response. If you're a bass lover, not going to matter to you, but if you're a bit more of an all-rounder, especially as it's mono and you're going to lose some clarity there, that may be an issue. But we'll get to that in the comparisons. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the specs as I normally do, just to say, I think it was like £250. They're always advertising on Harman Kardom. Our street price appears to be about £180, £180, £80. Two of those will play in stereo. It's still cheaper than a single one street price of the Onyx Studio 6, and even two of them would not play in stereo. We've got a big old battery, 37 watt hours. What do you think this much bigger speaker is on battery? Well, 12 watt hours, 12. And there is the clue. We already know you plug in the mains on this, the mains lead, it will go louder. And this appears to be, don't ask me why, I don't have the answer. This appears to be a speaker they really want you to use with mains lead plugged in, but hey, it will go portable for a while if you want. Now, anecdotally, people are telling me just over an hour at maximum volume is what you're going to get out of this. It is a tiny old battery in there. Why would they do that? This is a speaker they clearly do not want you to go portable with. I have no idea why. It's probably a deal breaker right there and then. But if you want one, I'm going to use it at home mostly. Oh yeah, I can plug it in, that's no problem. But yeah, I may want to go and sit in the garden. I may want to go around my girlfriend's house and she can hear, oh, just how big my bass is. And then you're kind of sorted, but you could still plug the mains in. The other thing that, how did they do that? When I found out, because I wasn't Harman Kardom, that's the high-end branch of JBL. Yeah, JBL for the masses. We want the Extreme 3. We like to pay over the odds for our JBL speakers, and we don't care what it sounds like, as long as it's got a bit of bass and a bit V-shaped and a bit high. Harman Kardom, SBC. I was expecting a decent codec. I was pretty gobsmacked actually when I found out that's still an SBC codec. What does that matter in the real world? Some people have been asking me, because I keep going on about codec, it's bitrate. There's no secret here. The higher the bitrate, the more information from that track you're going to get out. You're cutting that track into little bits and you're throwing away bits. Bluetooth, of course, is a compressed format. So SBC, look, they are all adaptive. I've got to point that out. And low end of the higher end codecs can still be around the same as an SBC. But on paper, SBC, that's a kick in the teeth, quite honestly, I think, from Harman Kardom. As I said, mono, no USB-C. It is, obviously, they want you to use this plugged in. So you've got a beefy charger, 19 volts, 2 amps. But of course, it's not going to be USB-C. You do have USB-C in your Motion Boom, but it's not a free lunch because you don't have the auxiliary. A lot of us still want an auxiliary input. You do get an auxiliary input on the Onyx Studio 6. Can't use this as a phone. Can't use this as a phone speaker, I should say. But you can on the Motion Boom. Harman Kardom themselves say 50 watts. Doesn't really matter. We'll see how loud it goes anyway. 50 watts and maybe 30 watt equivalent when it's plugged in, which would make them equal because that's also rated at 30 watts. But 1.5 kilos, 3 kilos. As I said, 2 of those is cheaper and weighs the same as a single one. But it's not like the Sony XB43. Because it's an awkward bricky size in your hand and it's 3 kilos, that's a big weight. We do have a well thought out handle. This is obviously, this is designed for the modern age, you know, to put someone with a few quid to spend. They want the logo Harman Kardom. Nobody knows it's SBC and it sits on the shelf and people say, oh, look at your speaker. And they're impressed. The other thing that surprised me, really nice, got an IPX7, also floats with the drivers up. So that's awesome. That means you can actually put it on the pool. It's safe because it's IPX7 and you can still listen to it playing. Whereas you can put that in water, but it won't float with the drivers up. In fact, you'll get a little bit of water in there and you'll have to wait a while for it to dry out. So you do get a separate tweeter, but it's all mono. No tweeters at all. But hey ho, does it really matter? Because it's all about the bass on the Soundcore Motion Boom. So let's get straight in. Let's do one. This is a reasonably low volume test. As I always say with my low volume test, you play it at maximum volume, it's completely pointless. So play it at low volume. Around 35% was the real world volume on these speakers. Coño.
Tira un paso de zumba, una matata, timón y pumba, salta y rebota que el bass retumba, así que móntala, que las nenas están bien así cala, sin cariño a la pista ve rómpela, que después sin culito te quedarás. Dale bebé, ven baila y goza, ven dalo todo, préndete todo, siente este ritmo que te provoca, te lleva al cielo y te vuelve loco. No te detengas, ponla bien dura, rompe la pista con tu locura. Tú estás bien buena, tú estás bien dura, tú eres latina, dale cintura. Latino, 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 latino. ¡Póntala, coño! Sandunga, fuego, 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 reggaetón con mumba, métele de nuevo, métele cintura, mami ponle gana, tú eres de las duras.
So my response now to all of you who are saying the Motion Boom, the bass is about the same as the Onyx Studio 6. I think a lot of it depends on what you're listening to, because mid to upper bass Motion Boom absolutely holds its own. It's not till you hit 50 hertz and down when you get into real deep bass territory, almost into subwoofer territory, you hear the difference. Now, depending on your room setup, how far you are from the speaker, and a lot of other things, including how bass heavy your tracks are, if there's no bass in your track, you won't hear any difference at all. The difference is 50 hertz and down. And when you hear them properly, 50 hertz and down, Onyx Studio 6 is kicking the Soundcore's butt. Now, that plays down to about 40. This plays down to 30. What's that? That is half an octave. You may or may not be able to hear a difference between half an octave. So we're talking 10 hertz. But by the time I'm 30 hertz here, I'm hitting noise floor. Whereas this is playing properly, albeit rolled off down to 30 hertz. It does play deeper when the volumes are matched. There is a difference in the bass. To me, I'm feeling the bass travel along the floor. Whereas that comes through the air and hits me in the stomach. It's impressive on its own, but almost bass-like, almost a bit thin. Now, at these volumes, we'll see what happens when we go up. We already know they're going to limit from 80%. At 35%, sounds a bit thin, but much clearer. So there's not much clarity. I have to say it's very smooth and very linear, that high end. And if we only had 2 tweeters, I can only dream what that would have sounded like. But a very smooth and balanced mid and high end, but with a boosted bass, albeit impressive and deep, makes it, to me, a little bit disjointed. You're going to really miss some of that clarity. It really depends on what you favour in your music, bass, mids or highs, whereas that has just about everything except that 50 hertz and below cannot match. The boosted, let's say, it's not that. It's just playing there in a linear way. It is a boosted bass. It's a bass heavy speaker, but it's still impressive. It can hit 30 hertz in a meaningful way, in a way you can hear. Let's go up to 60%.
I only call you when it's half past 5. The only time I ever call you. I only love it when you touch me. I feel me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me, baby. I'ma let you know and keep it simple. Tryna keep it up don't seem so simple. I just fucked 2 bitches before I saw you. And you gon' have to do it at my tempo. Always tryna send me off to rehab. Drugs started feeling like it's decaf. I'm just tryna live life for the moment. And all these motherfuckers wanna relapse. I only call you when it's half past 5. The only time that I'll be by your side. I only love it when you touch. I only call you when it's half past 5. The only time I ever call you. I only love it when you touch me. I feel me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me when I'm fucked up. I got them saying that they think I need therapy, when really I just need a bad bitch to come and cherish me. Take a peek inside my life and I'ma give you clarity, like the diamonds on the ring when I say marry me. And that's directed towards the love of my life, which hopefully I don't meet at some club some night, where every single guy just seems to be her type. I'm way too smart to know this ain't right. Fairy tales going off in my head at night. Very well that I know that this ain't life. A man can dream as long as he can fight, if you put in the work to reach new heights. I'm here to tell you that you gotta stay positive, instead of thinking when you on the stage that you bombing it. Once you do that, then it shows you confident. In my own lane, I've forever been dominant. My mental health really on a decline. I've been sitting here daily, just losing my mind. Toss and turn in my bed until the sun comes shine. Will I ever really learn what it takes to be fine? I ask myself what I learned from mistakes that I made in the past if I wanna be great. But most times I come to find that my findings are fake. My reality distorted from the drugs that I take. But wait.
Motion Boom, Onyx Studio 6. Upper bass, 160 hertz, minus 34, minus 35. Slight, tiny advantage to Onyx Studio 6. At 70 hertz, minus 26. It's a 2 dB advantage to the Motion Boom. But by the time you hit 50 hertz, minus 22, minus 16, that's 6 decibels up for the Studio 6. By the time you hit 30 hertz, minus 51, minus 61, 10 decibel advantage for the Onyx 6. But the point is, 30 hertz, we're almost touching the noise floor for the Motion Boom. We're much cleaner now on the Onyx Studio 6. Minus 51 is well above the noise floor. And we've been praising the Motion Boom for hitting 40 hertz. As you can see, 40 hertz, it's hardly rolled off. I mean, that's great. That's low, deep bass. But look at the Onyx Studio 6, 40 hertz. It's in line with the 70 hertz mark. So it's not rolled off at all, whereas it's a little bit rolled off on the Motion Boom. So Motion Boom plays down to 40 hertz. Onyx Studio 6 plays down to 30 hertz. Outside of a clearly boosted bass, it's very, very flat and it's very, very linear. Whereas Motion Boom, it is with our custom settings. We've pushed the mids and certainly pushed the very high end, 9 kilohertz and above, but I think it needs it for clarity. So, at the end of the day, Motion Boom can hold its own up to about 50 hertz, but after that, Onyx Studio 6 comes into its own and plays cleaner. So pretty much for me, it's the same story. Clarity, stereo, sounds great, and it's half the size, but if we're just comparing volume for volume, speaker for speaker, there is a whole different level of deep bass going on in the Onyx Studio 6. I just knew that was going to happen at some point. I just knew it. And I know a lot of you prefer upper bass to deep bass. So if you are a JBL Extreme 1, 2 fan, that sort of upper bass, you're going to either think they're matched and that low deep bass is not a big deal to you. Look, I'm not going to be a snob here, but I am going to say research shows, if you have a trained ear, if you have an experienced ear, if you've been exposed to more stereo equipment, hi-fi like equipment, what you consider a decent sound is different from when you were earlier in your years when you were less experienced. I'm not saying it in a snobbish way. I'm saying depending on how much stuff you've listened to, depending on what you're listening to, you may not even hear the difference in that deep bass, and it may not. And then even if you do hear it, you may or may not think that's a decent thing. But if you are someone now with a discerning ear, what they call a trained listener, if you go on the Harman Kardom site, where they do the curves and they give you the research, where they did for the headphone speakers, there is an area where you can go and become a trained listener, and what you consider good and bad, and the level of highs and lows will change as you become a trained listener. I'm not saying it in any snobbish way, and I'm not saying whether you should be or you aren't, but I'm saying if you are someone that they will class as a trained listener, you're going to say that bass is over the top. If you're someone who's having a party, you're going to say, I bleaking love it, because that reminds me, you go to a club, that's what you're going to hear. You're not going to hear that sort of a bass. You're going to hear that sort of over the top bass, and that's all you're getting. Oh no, I'm getting out of my head, and oh, lovely. And I'm not being funny, but that's what you get in a club, isn't it? And you're going to love that sound. That's a club-like sound to me, but that's not an audiophile's straight linear curve, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go straight on now to my 80% comparison, which is their sweet spot. Don't forget, both of them limit bass from 80% and up.
Let's get big. Let's get big, big, big. Let's get big, big, big. Let's get big until I forget my name. Let's get big, big, big. Let's get big, let's get big, big, big. Let's get big. If you wanna dance, I can tell you about this place I know, somewhere hidden in the stars. Oh, don't waste your energy, even though at 23 you gotta give your all tonight. Yeah, I can feel it in my bones, I don't wanna stop. You've got the recipe, I know it's gonna take us higher. Loosen up, celebrate. Get up, stand up on your feet. Let's get big until I forget my name. Let's get big. Jump right, slide to the left. Let's get big. Make it up while you can, and let's do it again. Let's get big. If you wanna dance, I can tell you about this place I know, somewhere hidden in the stars. No, don't waste your energy, even though we're 23, gotta give your all tonight. Let's get big. Let's get big, big, big. Let's get big, let's get big until I forget my name. Let's get big, big, let's get big, let's get big, big, let's get big. I wanna know where you're staying at, wanna know where you've been laying at. I wanna know. I'm going through all the old Kodak, wanna know why you hit me back. I wanna know. I've been holding something back that maybe you should know. I just want to give you this thing. Can you take it home? 'Cause we ain't seen what this could be. Quit playing games, just come in. Guarantee. Hope that you're here with me.
seeing what this could be. Quit playing games, just come in. Us, 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 us.
I don't think anything has changed from the low listening to the high listening. Very, very consistent between them. And the difference is, because this is bass heavy with a single tweeter and it's mono, vocals gonna sound recessed. But they're very, very smooth. There's nothing missing. And I can only, as I said, dream of what would have happened with two tweeters. So smooth but recessed. Definitely bass heavy, over boosted bass, but done in a nice tuneful way, which you may think is absolutely fantastic, or may have your neighbours banging on, well, probably from the floor below, because it travels through the floor. Whereas we've got nice stereo, we've got some clarity, we've got decent bass, but it doesn't travel along the floor. It's simply not at the level of the Onyx Studio 6. So all we really want, and that, don't forget, all on battery. Can now plug the mains lead in when I now do my maximum of volume test. See what the headrooms are on these two speakers. And if you're going to be playing really, really, really loud, you've got no neighbours or don't care about your neighbours, this could be the one bit of my comparisons you've been waiting for. Ultimate headroom.
Yeah, you were right this time, you were right this time. Take a look around, look what you did last night. What you did last night, never heard a sound. Yeah, I know that you told me one day you'd show that you were right this time, you were right this time. Oh no, now the truth comes out and I know that you want me about it. Shallow.
So Motion Boom, it is the loudest. It's the loudest if you measure by LUFS, and it's the loudest if you measure by peak. Minus 14.6 is a decibel up on the Studio 6 when it's got its mains lead plugged in. Indeed, 99.1, it's well down on the peak of the 101.4 for the Motion Boom. Doesn't really tell the story, does it? It's that bass, 40 to 60 hertz, minus 20, minus 31, 11 decibels up on the Motion Boom, and playing down to 30 hertz, well above the noise floor. But we're actually within the noise floor now at minus 30 for the Motion Boom. But to be fair, we never claimed it played down to 30 hertz. It plays down to 40 hertz. That's great. It's just that next to the Onyx Studio 6, it almost sounds lean because of that incredible deep low end bass. But that's with the mains lead plugged in. It's a lot quieter without the mains lead. Minus 19. It's 4.5 decibels down on the Motion Boom, and you can certainly hear the difference. Whereas, although technically quieter with the mains lead in, that bass, well, can fool your ears into thinking it's actually louder. On battery, it does still hold its own, 40 to 60 hertz, minus 23. It's 8 decibels up on the Motion Boom. But minus 32, minus 25 for mid and upper bass. That's now beating the Onyx 6 when it's on its little battery. The story is Motion Boom certainly holds its own, can certainly go loud, but if you plug the Studio 6 in, that is impressive deep bass, even if it is rolled off from 80% onwards. Was a surprise to me, even with the mains lead plugged in. Technically speaking, in the LUFS perceived loudness terms, it's still the Motion Boom because it has the stronger mids and highs. But hey ho, there's only one speaker here for deep bass at maximum volume. That's with mains lead plugged in. It's the Onyx Studio 6. Now, without the mains lead plugged in, because it simply doesn't go loud enough, even though it's retaining some of that lovely deep bass, the Motion Boom's going loud enough to be a deal breaker. That over and above the difference in the bass, because it's simply louder, your ears are going to perceive that as being more dynamic. And then I think the Motion Boom wins. So depending on your taste, depending on how loud you're going to play them, ultimately you have the potential with the mains lead plugged in, which seems to be what they want you to do anyway, given the battery they put in this, and they continue to put in this, with mains lead plugged in, you know, subwoofer-like bass, proper deep bass, rounded, but bass heavy and not, you know, not balanced. So you're gonna have to be a bass lover to really want that. But Motion Boom, £80 versus 180, absolutely retains its spot, pound for pound a world champion. Absolutely has some great deep bass. Absolutely can do some decent volumes. No, it doesn't have tweeters, but at least in this day and age where it's become a big deal. In fact, you've got two woofers and blades in stereo. It's amazing. Bear in mind, both of these speakers limit bass from 80 hertz. What does that mean? Well, by the time you're going over 80 hertz and hitting maximum volumes, it's going to become more screechy. It's all now about the mids and the highs, and that bass is limiting. So the actual sound signature is changing. It might keep its bass, but it's becoming a little bit more screechy, as is the Motion Boom. The whole sound signature shifts. But hey ho, we see that a lot. They just give you the ability to go louder with it and think, well, don't think we're going to give you bass to go with it. You want to go louder, we'll let you do that. But no, we're not going. We're going to look after our drivers. We don't want warranty returns. Thank you very much. This has been my Onyx Studio 6 review, like 4 years on or whenever you start talking about it. And I've hummed and hawed. And my conclusion is these are both nice. This is a brilliant pound for pound world champion. And this is going to make you feel warm and lovely when you hear that massive, deep bass. It's like playing a subwoofer that also has a woofer and a tweeter. And as long as you think of it in those terms, you're going to love it. So, no reason not to have both speakers. I hope you got something out of my review, and I thank you for watching.